Is there for honest poverty that hangs his head in all that? The coward slave, we pass him by, we dare be poor for all that, and all that, our toils obscure, and all that, the rank is but the guinea stamp, the man's the gowd for all that.
Greetings to the Ukrainian Student Republic finale of 2012. My name's Elisa Barwick and I'm an Executive Committee member of the Australian Citizens Electoral Council, the Australian wing of the international movement led by American economist Lyndon LaRouche. I want to present to you our vision of how to start rebuilding our nations, which means that we need a Hamiltonian national bank and a credit policy. This is a very optimistic policy, which all countries need today, because our world is threatened by war and a global economic breakdown crisis, both at the same time. In the world financial system, all the bailout policies of the international banks since 2008 have failed. The LIBOR interest rate scandal, which became public in July of 2012, has revealed that the world's largest conglomerate banks, which were recipients of trillions of US dollars of bailout money, systematically commit fraud to increase their securities dealing profits at the expense of cities, states, nations, and even the very lives of people. For us in Australia, just like every other country on the planet, today the concept of my ideal country has to begin with making sure that our country and our entire planet will survive the current crisis and the self-destruction of the system called globalisation that has dominated the past 40 years. You can read about the causes of the war danger and the economic crisis on LaRouche movement websites in many languages, including Russian. Today, please listen to how Helga Zepp-LaRouche, founder of the International Schiller Institutes and leader of the civil rights movement Solidarity in Germany, talked about these grave dangers in her webcast on April 27th of this year, which was especially addressed to audiences in Spain and Portugal.
Здравствуйте. Приветствую вас всех. Я хочу поговорить о двух экзистенциальных опасностях, угрожающих существованию человечества. Об одной из этих опасностей уже упоминала Денис. Мы сидим на вулкане. Этот вулкан может взорваться в любую минуту, даже когда мы разговариваем с вами, или же через недели, и привести к мировой термоядерной войне. Вторая экзистенциальная проблема заключается в том, что сегодняшняя мировая финансовая система, особенно трансатлантическая ее часть, накануне распада. Важно смотреть в глаза этим опасностям. Но вначале я хочу отметить, что цель этой передачи и цель этой встречи не в том, чтобы привлечь внимание к ужасающей ситуации в мире, но в первую очередь мы должны отдать себе отчет, особенно в Испании и в Португалии, в том, что мы имеем дело с последствиями абсолютно некомпетентной и зловредной политики со стороны Европейского Союза. Я хочу вспомнить, госпожа Меркель все время говорит, что нет альтернативы. Это ее любимая фраза. Она всегда говорит, нет альтернативы евро, нет альтернативы мерам финансовой экономии, нет альтернативы финансовой помощи, но это неправда. Альтернатива есть. И эта альтернатива уже была опробована в истории. Это закон Гласа-Стегола о разделении банковской деятельности. Этот закон ввел Рузвельт в 1933 году, и этот закон вывел Америку из депрессии 30-х. Этот же подход можно использовать сегодня. Существуют и другие варианты финансовых систем. Нет никакой необходимости цепляться за обанкротившуюся монетаристскую систему. Можно вернуться к кредитной системе. И существует подробный план экономической реконструкции Соединенных Штатов, Европы и других стран мира.
So, what is a credit system? It's a scientific principle, as Michael Kirsch of the LaRouche Political Action Committee in the United States explained in this 2011 video highlighting the concept of US President Roosevelt's Glass-Steagall law.
And we must change the monetarist economic policy of wild financial speculation and aggressive looting of the physical economy, because that is the root cause of geopolitics and the danger of war. Scientifically, a credit system is a system of principle consistent with the concept of the universe embodied in V.I. Vernadsky's noosphere, and not the mechanistic interactions imagined by Newton, Adam Smith, or Darwin. In a credit system, the future acts efficiently on the present. Using a credit system for this science driver economy, we can create infrastructure platforms for the development of our planet's frontiers and move on to master the solar system and galactic processes. A first step is the application worldwide of the American Glass-Steagall principle of a two-tier banking system. In Germany, it is called a Trennenbanken system. Named after a key Roosevelt-era law, Glass-Steagall means the separation and protection of state credit creation and normal commercial banking activity for productive investment against being dominated and poisoned by financial speculation. The Glass-Steagall policy will free governments from any obligation to honor debts incurred through financial speculation. This is necessary so that a system of long-term investment can create real physical wealth in the form of scientific and technological progress such as NWAPA and NASA represent. Governments can agree to shift to these principles, but Glass-Steagall is only the first step. A truly effective credit system, as Hamilton showed, orients to a future state not yet in existence. Where should we be in 50 years? Our post-crisis economic policy has to be driven by a concept of the frontiers of science to be conquered.
During 2012, leading people in Italy, Russia, France, the United States, and even Great Britain have called for reinstating Glass-Steagall type legislation to protect normal banking activity for the economy from destruction by speculators working through the so-called investment banks, which engineered the LIBOR interest rate manipulation and many other crimes. But Glass-Steagall banking separation, as Michael said, is only the first step towards a credit system. Why does every country need a Hamiltonian national bank? Not a central bank like the Bank of England or the US Federal Reserve System, but a Hamiltonian national bank. National banking is the means by which governments can direct public credit into developing the physical economy of the nation. It is the government's responsibility to raise the living standard of its citizens, anchored upon infrastructure projects for power, water, transportation, and health and education systems. These in their totality serve as a platform for the development of the high technology, manufacturing and agricultural industries that ensure the economy's ability to meet human needs. From the time that France in the 15th century emerged from the feudal dark age of Europe as the first sovereign nation state in modern history, monarchs such as French King Louis XI used their wealth and power to organise their kingdoms for the good of all their people, the common good, as Louis XI called it. This was the purpose for which the American colonies launched their 1776 to 1781 Revolutionary War against the British Empire, and which they sanctified in the General Welfare Clause of the preamble of the US Constitution. Our Australian Labor Party was founded in the 1890s upon that American precedent, even taking the American instead of the British spelling for Labor to declare a commitment to what the founders called the common good. Governments committed to the common good threatened the system of empires, whereby a tiny ruling oligarchy controlled private monetary systems for their own benefit and to control the masses of the population. From 1000 AD on, such empires were successively headquartered in Venice, Amsterdam, and then London. They wielded enormous power through privately owned central banks, through stock markets, and their domination of world trade through such global, genocidal behemoths as the Dutch and British East India Companies. The American founding fathers overthrew that ancient oligarchical system to establish the first republican system of government in the world, declaring the general welfare of all citizens as the state's reason for existing. The Americans established institutions of public credit and national banking as the bedrock of their republican system of government. Britain's imperial rule was based on its monetary empire, centred in the privately owned Bank of England and British East India Company. The Massachusetts Bay Colony challenged this system already in 1652 by establishing its own mint to issue its own currency, the Pine Tree Shilling. Though issued in silver, that currency was not based on the value of gold or silver bullion, but by the colony's ability and intent to develop its physical economy. American patriots, led by Benjamin Franklin, continued to advocate a sovereign currency system, as Franklin did in his 1729 paper, A Modest Inquiry into the Nature and Necessity of Paper Currency. Alexander Hamilton developed this idea as the backbone of America's independence. The following video was made by LaRouche PAC in 2009 to educate members of the US Congress about their own history.
120 years ago, the concept was well known as the American system of Alexander Hamilton and Henry Carey, or the national economy concept of Friedrich List and of Count Witte and the fervent anti-free trader Dmitry Mendeleev. But their ideas have been expunged from economics today. Today's historians are incompetent because they don't understand the difference between Adam Smith's feudal Europe, where private banks had arbitrarily given value to money, holding the sovereignty of nations hostage to the amount of this money they have or go into debt to private banks to have, on the one side, and on the other, Alexander Hamilton's revolutionary hypothesis of 1779 to 1781, a system where governments have no need of going into debt to private banks or praying to the market to create the money upon which the nation subsists. Whether this difference is understood will determine whether civilization will survive the current global breakdown crisis of the world economy. In 1779, in the middle of the war, as Washington's aide-de-camp coordinating all of the exigencies for the army, Hamilton realized that there was no possible way the motley of disunified states, which could barely be made to support the Continental Congress, were going to exist after the war. The powers necessary for a federal government that could unify the states lay within the realm of economic sovereignty and would define the difference between a sovereign credit system of a nation-state and those states which are plagued by external monetary authorities. As the central coordinator for Washington during the war, Hamilton rose to take full responsibility for the nation, and in April 1781, Hamilton wrote a long essay to the leading financier of the Continental Congress, Robert Morris. It is by introducing order into our finances, by restoring public credit, not by winning battles, that we are finally to gain our object. Hamilton wrote to Morris with a way to outflank the problem of the collapsing value and increasing scarcity of the continental paper currency, a way to support the Continental Congress with enough funds, despite the unruly and bankrupt condition of the states. Rather than depending on individual loans from abroad, private individuals or scarce taxes, which no matter how fast they were gathered, were spent even faster, the way the government could secure a permanent paper credit was to construct a national bank.
It would promote commerce by furnishing a more extensive medium which we greatly want in our circumstances. I mean a more extensive valuable medium. the tendency of the National Bank is to increase public and private credit. Industry is increased, commodities are multiplied, agriculture and manufacturers flourish, and herein consists the true wealth and prosperity of the state.
By converting the currency produced through loans of the bank into a real and successful instrument of trade, it would increase the quantity and strength of the currency. Morris and his associates in the Continental Congress were convinced, and the Congress chartered the Bank of North America that year, a bank whose sole reason for existence was to facilitate the development of a national economy. By this new bank serving as a tool of the Continental Congress, Hamilton transformed the United States from a monetary system into a credit system. In 1790, as Secretary of Treasury in the Washington administration, Hamilton could then initiate the powers he'd outlined in Article 1, Section 8. By means of the powers to pay the debts, provide for the common defense and general welfare, lay and collect taxes, regulate commerce, the federal government could now ensure the power of its credit. Hamilton first assumed all the debts of the states incurred during the war into a national debt, which served as a driver to initiate the powers of government. And second, since the Bank of North America was insufficient for the task, he established a new national bank, housing the national debt. Hamilton rigorously showed the national bank which he had set up before the Constitution to be the necessary and constitutional mean for carrying out the powers of Congress. After the establishment of this national bank in 1790, 30 state-chartered commercial banks sprang up over the next 10 years, acting as nurseries of economic wealth, and, working in tandem with the National Bank, formed a national banking system, creating the medium of exchange which could facilitate the growth of the federally directed economy. The power of the national banking system established the fact that we create value in the action to achieve a future state not yet in existence. The period of time in which these bills of credit end up being actualized into hard money, or something which can be accounted as money in circulation, as a physical representation in the form of infrastructure projects or applied technology, takes as much time as those items take to be built, and can be restrained in their allocation according as a practical estimation of a nation's power to create those items seems to justify.
National banking, combined with Hamilton's other policy initiative of high tariff protection to foster manufacturing, became known worldwide as the American system, in opposition to the British system of free trade and privately controlled central banks. President Abraham Lincoln, who was elected president in 1860 on the eve of the British-sponsored Confederacy's secession and the resultant Civil War, revived the American policy of public credit by issuing the famous greenbacks to finance the war, following the refusal by Wall Street financiers to make loans to the US government to suppress the Confederate rebellion. The American system inspired people all over the world to desire sovereignty, including among Britain's colonial dominions. In Australia, the Reverend Dr. John Dunmore Lang championed American-style republicanism in his 1852 book, Freedom and Independence for the Golden Lands of Australia. Many nations employed various forms of public credit for directing economic development. Australia went so far as to establish a Hamiltonian national bank, the Commonwealth Bank of Australia. From its inception in 1911 until 1923, and then again in 1942 to 1949, the Commonwealth Bank demonstrated the power of national banking. It directed public credit of Australia into the development of infrastructure and crucial industries, including the Transcontinental Railway. It financed Australia's participation in World War I, and it financed the miraculous wartime economic mobilisation of World War II, which transformed Australia from an agrarian backwater into an agro-industrial powerhouse, including the post-war Great Snowy Mountains scheme. It was the American expatriate King O'Malley who gave the Labor Party its deep appreciation of the workings and significance of national banking. O'Malley proclaimed the precedent for the proposed new national bank. "I am the Hamilton of Australia," he declared. He was the greatest financial man who ever walked the earth, and his plans have never been improved upon. The American experience should determine us to establish a national banking system which cannot be attacked. Notwithstanding the remarkable accomplishments of the Commonwealth Bank, its 12 years of operation before private financiers seized control of it were not enough for the bank to break the British monetary stranglehold on Australia. In 1923, the London banks directed the Australian government to hand control of the bank to a board of private businessmen who promptly turned off the tap of public credit. During the Great Depression, the privately controlled board of the Commonwealth Bank refused to follow a government directive to issue credit for public works, a plan to alleviate the 30% unemployment which was based on the successful model being applied by US President Franklin Roosevelt. In 1939, on the eve of the war, the ageing King O'Malley again tried to re-establish the Commonwealth Bank under its original purpose and charter, as opposed to its speculative misuse by private financiers. O'Malley wrote that the individual rights people believed were theirs could not be guaranteed without sovereign control over credit, and that the purpose of national banking was to facilitate the creation of tangible physical wealth. The Commonwealth Bank was indeed revived by John Curtin and Ben Chifley during and immediately after World War II with stunning success. But the British Crown's Privy Council overturned Chifley's bank nationalisation legislation, which had been passed by both Houses of Parliament in 1949. Prime Minister Paul Keating, who held office in the early 1990s, declared his intention to dismantle every aspect of the advanced agro-industrial economy that old Labor governments had used public credit to build up, proposing instead that Australia's economic future should be almost solely that of a raw materials exporter. Australia today has indeed become a vast raw materials quarry, but an industrial and agricultural wasteland, while the Australian people are burdened by massive debt and skyrocketing living costs. In April 2012, the CEC launched the latest phase of our decades-long campaign to restore Australia's sovereignty, with the resolution, "The future of Australia, develop or die." What Lyndon LaRouche told an internet audience on September 7th, 2011, talking about the United States, applies for Australia and every other nation.
We cannot use a normal form of reform of the monetary system of the United States. The situation is too bad and too urgent. Therefore, we're going to have to go from the kind of monetary system we had, not a monetarist system, but the monetary system we had at former times, as in Roosevelt's time, to do something Roosevelt had not really attempted to do explicitly. And that is to put the nation back under the provision of its original constitution to function as a credit system rather than a money system. There's not enough money that we can create legally and prudently to save this nation. We've gone too far, too long, especially since 2007. Therefore, we're going to have to go to what is enshrined in our original federal constitution, to a credit system. In other words, the federal government will, under law, instead of a money system, will have a credit system. And the credit system will be used not only to get the police, the firemen, and other essential state-level people back into employment, to get federal institutions which are needed back into employment and functioning, but we're going to have to go beyond that. We're going to require a very large and powerful driver for a genuine economic recovery of not only the United States, but also of nations which are friendly, shall we say, or will become friendly to the United States. What we're going to do is tell them to join us in a reform of monetary systems or the like, which will enable Europe to follow the same course that we are following. We will create a joint credit system. What we will do with Europe in cooperation with Europe and with Russia and with China and with India and so forth. What we will do is establish a kind of credit system which will be universal among these nations. We will go to credit as a way of investing in a buildup of the productive powers of labor throughout that region.
Then let us pray that come it may, as come it will, for all that sent unworth o'er the earth shall bear the gree, and all that, for all that, and all that, it's come and yet, for all that man to man the world o'er shall breathers be, for all that